Hello, everybody. All right, so we are going to go get started today. I am so excited. Oh, what am I doing? See, I'm still new to this game. I don't know how to play it. Wanted to go live today. I have my friend and guest, Eric, with me. He is a licensed attorney here in California. And we're going to talk about something I think that is going to affect a lot of people. And whether or not you think this relates to you because you're like, I don't plan on building an ADU. I don't plan on doing any additional thing extra, around my house, even though you have the land for it, let's say. It could still affect you because the reason why, what if your neighbor decides to put, three or four, I mean, heck, even five or six ADUs in their backyard and now turns it into like a high density situation. And you initially bought your home thinking that you were in, a residential neighborhood with an R1. And now you have, four or five neighbors next door to you. And it's not what you originally thought that you bought, right? So I think it's going to affect a lot more people than people realize. And so as a result of that, how are these new laws going to be? And I brought in an expert because I am not a real estate lawyer here in California. I am a real estate broker. So it's a little bit different. And to understand these laws, I've printed them all out. And Eric and I are just going to have a conversation about it. Like, I have my perspective about what these laws I think will be from a real estate broker's perspective, as well as a homeowner. But I would really like to hear what our lawyer says. So, Eric, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Scott, for having me again.
I know this is amazing, right? So we're gonna do this consistently every other week. So, what do you know about all of this stuff that's going to happen in 2025?
Yes, so California's state legislature has passed essentially, roughly 12 new laws that's going to come into effect in 2025. As your viewers are probably going to know, California will have a housing shortage crisis, and these laws are really in place to really streamline the ADU building process. Now, prior, there has been a few laws that have tried to basically have homeowners build ADUs and make it easier. Unfortunately, those laws, there are some issues with them, and these laws that have come into effect in 2025 really does solve some of those existing issues, and hopefully again encourages developers and homeowners to build ADUs to increase the amount of housing in urban areas.
Okay, and so I mean, of these 12 laws, I think the biggest one right now that I saw that popped into my mind when I was looking at them was AB 2533. And AB
Yes.
2533 talks about amnesty for unpermitted ADUs. Like,
Yes.
people have basically built these things, didn't get permits for them. So, I mean, what are the pros and cons and what are the ramifications for it?
Well, Scott, I'm sure you've probably showed people houses before where the sellers is, we have an ADU here, it's unpermitted, right? And there's always risks to buying something that's unpermitted, right? Means that the city or municipal government hasn't gone in to inspect it to verify, everything is up to building code, right? And so what happens is a lot of people that, don't want to get things permitted will never get things permitted. This new law essentially provides, as you mentioned, an amnesty. It really does encourage people who have currently unpermitted ADUs to basically go to the government and say, hey, I want to get this permitted in now. And now this new law essentially can't makes basically says the cities or the county can't penalize you for having an existing unpermitted, but also streamlines that process to get it permitted. Now, there's a caveat to this, okay? There still have to be some minimum habitability standards for it still to get it permitted. All right. So don't think that, if you have an existing ADU that doesn't have running water, that they're going to be okay with it, that an ADU without running water is going to allow someone to live in there, right? So they still have some minimum, but it does allow people who have existing ADUs that are unpermitted to go to the city and says, "Hey, I have an unpermitted ADU. I want to get this permitted."
And I mean, like any other structure, you would just basically have to apply for occupancy, right? You would need
Correct,
an
correct.
occupancy
You want
permit.
to get the certificate of occupancy, meaning that someone from the city has inspected it and said, yes, this you can have people living in there.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a good thing because that's going to actually help improve the safety of that. Because, with these unpermitted buildings, if people are going in there and living in there and it's not permitted, I mean, who knows if it's safe, right? Whereas now with this amnesty program, it can allow people to go in to the city and say, hey, look, I know I didn't permit this in the past, but let me go ahead and permit it now. It also like reduces the burden of all these excessive fees for owners too. What doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does. And so, as a homeowner, you don't need to worry about all these penalties and fees that may have occurred for having an unpermitted accessory dwelling unit. And so it really does encourage people who currently have an unpermitted ADU to really get it permitted. And
Yeah.
it's to encourage, because trust me, I've gotten a lot of people call me asking about, hey, I'm trying to buy this property, it's unpermitted, what do I need to do? Theoretically, you actually can already get it retroactively permitted, right? But there could be penalties and fees and fines that could be associated with it, right? Now, I will also allow, this law doesn't necessarily address the issue of property taxes. Whenever you do have added square footage to a property, that there is an added property tax associated with that. So that's something that people need to be mindful of. But it solves the problem of people being afraid of getting penalized for having an unpermitted unit.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that it changes the property taxes. You're gonna have to higher property taxes, obviously, because you added an improvement.
Hmm.
But you also get the benefit of when you resell it, it's permitted.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
you're gonna
Yeah.
get credit from it on the appraiser.
You're correct. You will get an added actual value in equity, or for that property, because it's added square footage that is approved by the county. So when you sell it, you can tell the buyers, hey, this is approved, it's included in the square footage, and in terms of evaluating your property, right, that's also included in an increase in your property value.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I would think that's a no-brainer. I mean, like for here in San Diego, our property taxes is under 2%. It varies slightly from area to area, but typically it's like 1.125% in most of the areas in San Diego.
Hmm.
So for a barely just above a 1% tax that you're paying, you're potentially getting, hundreds of thousands of dollars in valuation added to your property value when you sell
Yeah,
it. So
correct.
for me,
If
that's a
you
no-brainer.
Correct. You will, because if it's usually, I'm assuming if you already have an unpermitted ADU, right, you probably spent that money already, however much that may have been in the past, right? And as long as everything's still up to building codes and is verified by the government, then you're not spending any additional money to increase your property value. I would say
So
overall, this is a good law in the step in the right direction to get people who have unpermitted units to get it approved.
So let me ask you this. I don't know, like these bills, guys, they're long, right? I mean, I asked Eric to take a look at them, and it's a lot to go through. But the thing is, do you remember reading in that particular AB bill, assembly bill, whether or not how does the city or the county, I guess, handle property taxes with regards to like let's say you make an improvement, right?
Hmm.
Um, and you built this ADU in 1980 when the building codes were different, right? The building codes in 1970s are different from they are in 2020. Now that you're applying for this building code technically in 2020 and not in 1980, do you get grandfathered in from
Not
the existing
necessarily.
structure,
Not necessarily.
or
Again,
or is the city going to make you come up to code? right? Because if
Probably
that's the
again,
case, it'll be very expensive.
it can again. It does streamline. Again, it's an amnesty, but the law does allow the city and the municipal government to make sure that it is still a habitable property, right? And so there is criteria that the city can still use to say, hey, no, this property doesn't have, the electrical, code up to code to and still deny it or to get the person to get it up to code.
So let's
Right?
say, for example, like this is a new law, like because I sell a lot of homes in San Diego, right? And so sometimes when we go into a home, we have a second story home. There's a railing, and then there's a stairway with the banister, and then the banister is it's maybe 6 inches wide, right, between the gap, the slats. And the new law basically code says that it has to be like less than 4 inches or 4 inches wide, right? So the thing is how do you feel about do you think the city will make the homeowners change even something like that, right? I mean,
No,
that's not a
no.
safety
So
issue.
this law specifically prohibits local agencies from denying permits for these units based on, you know, building standard violations, unless
Okay.
necessary to address the substandard conditions, right? So this is the key thing, substandard conditions, right? So a railing that is, couple inches in variance from what existing building codes requires isn't going to be something that's going to be used to deny you a permit,
Okay.
right? It's substandard conditions as in, there's no running water, right? If you build an ADU, and you're thinking I can get it permitted to get people to live in it, but it doesn't have a sewer, it's not connected to a sewer system or connected to the electrical grid, it's gonna be problematic, right?
Okay.
So you still have to have basic habitability issues of running plumbing, running electrical, and stuff like that. But minor variations from current building codes isn't going to be used to deny you a permit.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are converting their garages, for example, right, into ADUs a lot of times. And because of that, you know, you go in and like I see it, I highly doubt a lot of those garage conversions are permitted.
No,
And
no, sure.
so this will allow them to actually permit it.
Possibly, yes. Yes, depending on the garage conversions. I've seen some pretty bad garage conversions where it's clearly you can't, no one's supposed to be living here. But if you've done it correctly, then sure, yeah, you can definitely get it permitted.
Yeah. I'm actually seeing a lot of ADUs in Mira Mesa, for example, right now, like tons. And
Near
it's
Mesa is great. So these ADU laws are great in places where there's no HOA, right? Mira Mesa, a lot of the properties there have been built since the early 70s and 80s, right? And there's no
yeah,
existing HOA. So all you have to deal is with the city bureaucracy to get an ADU, right?
yeah,
Problematic is the laws that are passed doesn't address that. A lot of homeowners association also have the authority to say no, we're not going to permit this, right? And
yeah.
well, so there are still missing pieces of the puzzle with these laws that's coming into effect in 2025 that it can still prevent someone from building an ADU, right? If you are in a single family community with an HOA and any construction that you build in your backyard requires HOA approval, well, there's no guarantee that the HOA is going to agree for you to build an ADU on your property, right?
Yeah, that's true. Because there
So
was this one house in particular that I drive by it a lot, and our front part of the home has the main house, and then the backyard. I mean, it's not even that big, and it has like what looks to me like three properties back there, and the setbacks were narrow enough for somebody to barely like walk through it, and
right.
so I'm like, wow, that is close.
So there's also a concern that a lot of these laws may have lowered some of the strict criteria and making a lot of these, you know, accessory dwelling units, be, as you mentioned, really close together, much higher density, which again puts a lot of strain on infrastructure, right? I actually
Yeah.
had a good friend of mine that bought a place in North Park, and she specifically bought this place because there wasn't a permitted ADU. But she specifically says that I'm not renting it out for long term, to some family or someone that lives in North Park. I'm only using it for short term rentals because Airbnb, specifically because lack of parking, right? Certain areas like in San Diego where you can build an ADU, that's fine, but there's other considerations such as parking that's going to be a limitation to what people can actually use the ADUs for, right? The law that's coming into effect, while it does streamline a lot of the construction of this, but the law doesn't necessarily encourage people to actually use these ADUs once it's built to actually solve the housing crisis, right? In fact, I would argue a lot of these people that are building ADUs or wanting an ADU is because, hey, look, I can post it on Airbnb, and I can just rent it out, get some, monthly income, but not necessarily put it out on the market for a long-term rental to solve people who need to live in that area to work in that area, right? So
So do you
there's
think that the state is potentially creating more problems by doing stuff like this?
Could be, you know, if you're encouraging high density housing, right? That means you're gonna have more housing connected to the public sewer system. You're gonna have more
Yeah.
housing connected to, the water system, the electrical grid. All of this is gonna put more strain on public infrastructure, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
unless you have the city government also addressing the the influx of this stuff coming on into the public utility system, then it can cause a lot more headaches for people, right?
Yeah.
Parking
Going
is
to
a big issue right now. You can build
parking
as
area.
many ADUs on, but if people can't park where they want to live, then it makes it very hard for people to actually live in that area, especially if
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
commuting.
Like especially in areas like Kensington here in San Diego, Mira Mesa is notorious for terrible parking. It's
Hmm.
just every house has 3 or 4 cars already. I
Hmm.
cannot imagine if they put like 2 or 3 more ADUs in the backyard, and then at that point, a spot that was really designed for 4 cars, let's say max, now potentially could have 10.
Correct.
Yikes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So
I'm not seeing any of these laws that require when you build these higher density that they also have to designate area for parking. All right. And so you can build all the houses you want, but if there's lack of parking, then you're going to just get people parking all over the place, or, and that could be a problem. Right.
do you really think though that people will, I mean, obviously the government didn't think about all of these potential other ramifications when they proposed all of these laws, but do you think people are going to build more? Because I'm seeing it a lot more versus,
Well,
or do you think it's just like what you said, that you don't think a lot of people will build?
developers will build, okay? They will build. They're in the business. If it makes economical sense for developers to build an ADU or multiple units on a plot of land, higher density, because then they can sell each unit and recoup, right? It's more of an economical factor. On
Yeah.
average, right now, an ADU costs between $200,000 to $400,000 for an average size ADU, right? If I own a home in Mira Mesa and I have space for an ADU and I gotta sink $200,000 to $400,000 in an ADU, I better know that that ADU is going to increase my home value to cover that. And on top of that, if I'm taking out like a HELOC, a home equity line of credit to build this, right? That means I gotta make sure that my monthly gain from this ADU offsets my, you know, HELOC payment, monthly payment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So while it does, these laws does cut down on the bureaucracy, right, in terms of getting things done through the city, there's an interesting missing element in all this is actually does it reduce the cost of construction in terms of contractors,
Mhm.
materials, right? Subcontractors, right?
Yeah.
Anytime that I just come from personal, when I hire a contractor, I'm like amazed at how much the labor costs and material costs are for building an ADU right now, right?
Yeah.
And so, um, and from my perspective, I deal with a lot of real estate disputes. So the number one calls that I get from clients that wanting to build an ADU is complaints about the contractor not doing a good job or not getting things
Yeah.
timely done or why it's so expensive and costly. Right? There has been a big news story up in the Northern California about one of the largest ADU builders out there that went bankrupt. Right? And
Yeah.
they essentially took a lot of the homeowners money and was unable to deliver,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
So um, while
So
these laws that's coming in 2025 absolutely does address a lot of the bureaucracy and cuts a lot of the red tape in terms of getting an ADU, there are still areas that I think the state government um, can address in terms of reducing the cost of building these ADUs.
yeah. And we're gonna put all of these laws, all of these new ADUs laws. We're gonna put links in the description below when we're done, and then that way, anyone who wants to get that as a resource, you can download it from the links that we're gonna provide. Um, Speaking of high density, actually, um, I'm gonna move on to the next bill, which is SB 1211. And SB 1211 basically is the legislation that enhances the development of ADUs, particularly in multifamily properties. But the thing is, a lot of the properties that are being added, um, they're technically not built. They're not being built in areas that are zoned for multifamily. Like for example, we have. I'm gonna have. I'm gonna show you a video real quick in Claremont, where they actually built 12 units in a small area of that was originally zoned for R1. And
Back against a proposed ADU development that they say would include a dozen units on one single property. But residents argue the city needs to balance the need for more housing with the character and safety of neighborhoods. Our Kasha Gorchik is in Claremont with the call for action from that community.
This particular development here in Claremont on Shoshone Avenue would include the main house, converting the garage into an ADU, and then 5 two-story ADUs in the backyard with 2 units each, totaling another 10 ADUs. Residents here on this narrow cul-de-sac street say they have serious concerns, and they hope the city will reconsider before formally approving this project.
If this thing goes up, our neighborhood will completely change forever.
Claremont neighbors are concerned about a bonus ADU project that feels more like an apartment complex.
You can't build on that. It's unsafe.
The property in question, 4602 Shoshone Avenue, sits at the end of a narrow cul-de-sac.
Our safety concern for
let me ask you this then. What is the city to do if they're being told, obviously from very angry neighbors saying like, look, you can't let them build it here. And then the state is now saying, well, we're providing these new laws that actually cause the city to actually have to allow the permit. Because like, for example, I think there was one law which talked about, I think it was, here, I'm looking it up, SB 1037 and SB 450. And basically what that law basically says was that it imposes potential penalty for housing element non-compliance, enforcing the importance of local agencies to adhere to the state's housing requirements and planning. So the city is now potentially in conflict with the state.
Absolutely. This is exactly what the controversy is, right? And I've had clients call me from certain cities like Huntington Beach complaining about how even though California state has passed laws that are supposed to make it easier to pass to get ADUs constructed, the city government is just not cooperating, right? And that has been the tension with all this, because the state governments, California, state legislatures, they want more housing, and they want to, tell the cities, you guys need to build more housing. However, people living in the city, people like us who lives in the city of San Diego, who vote for our city council, right? We are voting for people who, probably don't want that many housing, right? And so this is where the conflict begins, is what all these laws in 2025, a good portion of it is basically strengthening the state's ability to tell the city, you guys have to do this. And obviously that's going to cause a ripple effect, because people in that neighborhood, as you saw in those clips in Claremont, are going like, we bought a house here for single family. It's zoned for single family. We expected only people who are living here for single family purposes. And all of a sudden you have essentially an 8-unit,
12 unit in this case,
or 12, or how many units, quote unquote, apartment complex being put up, right?
Yeah.
And
then you saw the corner. It's in the cul-de-sac. Like, imagine
cul-de-sac.
sticking 12 units back there, and every unit potentially has 2 cars.
Yeah, each person that's living in there has a car, and it's going to cause a lot more headaches, right? And these are some of the unintended consequences where that these laws could potentially put, right? You could own a house in Claremont right now, and then in a few years, the plot of land that's next door, bought by some developer, decides to, redo that property into a 12-unit property, right? And get it permitted through the city. And the city says, well, the state right now has these laws in place. All we can do is follow it, right? We got to do this. So this is where the tension comes in between the state and the municipalities, right? And before 2025, currently, a lot of cities, Huntington Beach, Del Mar, I've heard, certain older communities that people have lived there for a lot of years on big plots of land are really trying to say, no, we don't want this, because someone can come in and basically tear down existing property or redo the existing property into a 12-unit property and the city really can't do anything, because the state has already said, you guys have to do this. I'm curious,
like, the people watching, our audience, like, I would love to hear what your thoughts are, right? I mean, because the thing is we know there are housing issues. Housing in California is very expensive, right? I mean, the median price home, for example, in San Diego is actually about $1 million, right? Depending on what area you're in. And that's just insane. I mean, if you think about it, even if you put 20% down, which most people can't, most first-time home buyers are putting 3.5 doing an FHA loan. And the thing is you're putting 20, and you're required to borrow like $800,000, which in most other states, I mean, that'll buy you a really big house, right? So you have to balance that. And you're like, well, okay, I understand that homelessness is a major problem in California. I understand that that new laws have to be adopted to help create more homes. But at the same time, you're talking about, creating a situation where where there is going to be a bunch of ADUs in areas where primary homeowners that never intended for this to happen is now having to, like, I want to know what you guys think, like, in the audience, like, are you guys as upset about this, or what are you guys thinking, right? The thing is there's a new law that I'm gonna put up real shortly. It's actually AB 2553, and it's changing the definition of what major transit is. And I'm going to stick it up right now for you. Let me see. And we're going to talk about basically showing you why this definition is critical, because it's going to change the definition of major transit. And so what happens is it's going to allow people who are within a certain, like, mile, so many miles, I think it's like half mile from that location, in order to then basically allow them to have almost like an unfettered amount of ADUs built, kind of like that, 12-unit property that was in Claremont that we just saw. Did you have a chance to take a look at this particular AB bill?
Correct. Yeah, it expands the definition of what a major transit stop under what CEQA is. CEQA stands for California Environmental Quality Act. So why CEQA has been such a problem and headache for a lot of developers is because any type of development, you have to get an environmental impact report, and it's basically another hoop and hurdle for a lot of developers to do. And, it can be a very easy way for a lot of people who don't want projects to go forward to stop the project because they're not compliant with CEQA. Right, that has been the easiest way for a lot of people to stop certain developers from developing. And now, when you expand certain definitions, right, then it makes it easier for certain developers to say, well, we're exempt from having to comply with CEQA, and making development much easier in those areas. So again, the legislature in AB 2553, the intent was, okay, we need more housing and higher density housing, and promote developers for construction in areas that are near, public transportation, right? And so developers now, looking at potential projects in areas that are close to public transportation are like, well, now it makes us more sense for us to develop this area into more higher density housing, because now we don't have to go through the burden of complying with CEQA.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the point of that law there. Yeah.
But again, it exacerbates potentially the issue of
it because CEQA is there to, because environmentalists, there are substantial environmental impacts to certain high density housing.
Yeah.
And, now developers that build higher density housing near these transit stops don't need to worry about having too much of an environmental impact, right?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly don't know how I feel about it, because on one hand, as an agent, I'm like, okay, great, we can sell more homes. But on the other hand, it's like, I understand as a homeowner the potential issues that we're going to have to face with, these developers building additional units in such a way that we're not, it's going to create such density problems, in my opinion.
That's the whole point of why the state wants to do this. And this is where cities are trying to push back. And now the state is basically taking away a lot of the city's ability to stop a lot of these developments, right?
Yeah.
It is what the state has decided to do in terms of trying to solve this housing problem. Now, personally, I think that, building ADUs is not necessarily going to solve the housing crisis. There are a bunch of other things that the state can definitely do to incentivize people to sell property these days to increase the supply, rather than, making it easier to build, right?
Yeah.
Building is one aspect, but if you build too much, there are consequences to that. That I don't think the state has fully looked into what those potential consequences are.
Yeah. And are you familiar with the bill that Governor Newsom put, where it allows homeowners to basically sell their ADU separately?
Oh yeah.
And the thing is basically what you're doing is you're turning a single resident property into like a condominium, right? So every owner allows, let's say if you have 2 units, then it's 2 owners on that property. And as a result, it's supposed to, again, create more opportunities for people to then sell their property and allow people to basically live in the back house, let's say, and rent their primary residence.
Correct.
So
That law basically allows you to subdivide, make it easier to subdivide out your property. So if you have a big land or parcel of land that you have your single family house on it, and then you built an ADU, you can basically subdivide your parcel out. So you have two individual parcels, and you can sell off the ADU parcel to someone else, right? Theoretically, yes, if people put in the money and want to do that, that's a possibility, right?
yeah, correct. And I think that what it was there's a handbook that the state of California actually put, and I'm going to pull it up real quick on here just to show you guys. And this talks about the additional dwelling units and how they're going to allow you to parcel it out. We'll also include this booklet if for those of viewers who are curious about it, so that way you can take a look at it specifically if you're thinking about doing something like this. I think this could be a good thing, in my opinion. One of the possibilities, one good thing about it is, like, imagine if a lot of the seniors that, they may not have planned it effectively when they were younger or whatever. And so as a result, what they're doing now is they could potentially put an ADU in the back, rent it out, and live in there and then sell the front ADU. And so as a result, they have income from the sale of their front house. This way they can then use that to survive. So I've heard that from proponents of this particular bill, as one of the potential positives.
Correct. Yes. It does allow for it. I'm always very curious, even though there's these laws in place that makes it simple, or you can do this and do this, who actually is taking advantage of these new laws to do this? I'm just thinking about if I'm like a retired person that has a house in Del Mar, I like my privacy, I have my plot of land with my house on it. Am I really going to build an ADU to then sell off, to earn some extra cash from that? I don't know how many people are going to be too incentivized to do that, just because the law allows it to do it, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of those things that, because I talk to a lot of clients who do this, and I'm always asking them, right, why are you building ADU, right? A lot of them, I say, especially single family homeowners, they're like, oh, I'm building ADU, because, my in-laws are wanting to live, parents coming in to occasion to live, or I'm renting out for Airbnb short term. I haven't had too many people tell me that they plan to rent it out long term, and doing something like this, right? Not everyone wants to be in the business of being a landlord. That's just, I don't think that, I think that's the missing piece when all this, for like people like single family homeowner. Now, if I'm a developer and I bought, a piece of land with a property, like whoever was developing that property in Claremont, that I want to turn the existing single family home into a 12 unit, ADU, and stuff like that.
So you anticipate that developers and potentially even flippers then?
I think this law is more geared towards assisting developers and flippers, not necessarily like private homeowners and getting them to, build an ADU.
So potentially this is more about politics than it is about.
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't be surprised if this is about politics. This is absolutely about politics. Now, they make it seem like, oh, I have a house now, I can, build an ADU. But again, am I going to drop 200 to 400K to build an accessory dwelling unit and to rent it out? It really does take someone that really wants to be in the short term, or be a landlord to do this, right?
Yeah. Well,
right?
Actually, speaking of landlord, like just this last November, we had a bill in California, Prop 33 and 34, right? And it talked about rent control, basically. And the idea was that rent control in California would allow landlords to not raise rent out of control to the point where people can't afford to live in here, right? And so that law didn't pass.
It didn't pass. It didn't pass. It basically still restricts municipalities from establishing rent control, um, and that's what the people wanted. You know,
Yeah.
which basically maintains the status quo. Right now, cities have a hard time passing rent control laws because the current law or the previous law is basically strips that power away from cities and holds it with the state, and the state has the full control or whether or not to pass rent control or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Um,
And the thing is all of this again is to try to solve homelessness, right? And the thing is you know, I see where you know the government officials are trying to do one thing, but then at the same time it's like, how do you solve a problem this complicated?
or you want my opinion on it? How to
Yeah.
solve it? Okay, it's not necessarily just building more. Building more doesn't necessarily, I mean, yes, you increase the supply. What you got to incentivize is get people to sell, all right? People right now in California hoard houses, all right? Because there's an incentive to hoard housing, okay? Why? A big giant, if I have bought in La Jolla in the 80s, all right? And I'm 65 now. I own one of those houses in La Jolla, big property, uh right.
Worth
I
$4
have no
million.
incentive to sell. I have no incentives. Why would I sell, right? I'm going to be hit with capital gain taxes. Not only that, rather, right, but how do I avoid capital gain taxes on something like this is to then pass it on to my next of kin, right? Then I get a step up in basis, and then my family member just holds on to it. So real estate has also ultimately, for people who know real estate, is generational wealth. They pass it on each generation. So you see houses in La Jolla they sit empty, but they have been in a family line for many years, right? And they just hoard houses. There's
Well,
no
I mean,
incentive for people to sell right now. Why
I'm
would
not a proponent. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a proponent of raising the taxes or a situation like what you were talking about with the encouraging people to sell it. Like, I think one thing is one solution for that could be like, you know, raising property taxes when you die and you give the property to your kids, right? So they tried that with Prop 19,
Yeah,
right? If
correct.
you're not moving in, you're going to have to pay the property taxes,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
now at the new price, potentially people might the heirs of those children might not be able to
Correct.
be able
That's
to
one
take that
way
massive.
Prop 19 was framed to make it sound good because it said, oh, if you're over the age of 55, now you can take your tax basis and transfer it to the same to a newer property. When in fact, actually, you could have already done that before Prop 19. But what was hidden in Prop 19 was that it changed the parent-child tax exemption from reassessment, where now only when you the only exemption is if your parents pass it to your child is if it's your parents' primary residence and going to be your primary residence and within 1 year. All right.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if it's not your primary residence and you inherit a property, guess what? Your property is going to be reassessed at the current market rate. Most likely, it's 3 times whatever your parents bought it for.
Or
And
more.
unless you can continue to fund and pay the property taxes on the run, you're ultimately going to decide to sell it, right? And you're
Yeah.
going to sell it to probably a developer that's going to ultimately build a whole bunch of ADUs, right? And ultimately, who makes out with all the money is the developer, who now is able to, put multi-units on that piece of land. That each unit is going to be sold for however millions of dollars, right?
Yeah. So
it-
I guess what I should do is tell people who are watching, hey, if you're thinking about developing, call me because
I mean, I guess
at this point, what's
ultimately,
it's gonna be
yes, you do
impossible for the
want
little guy.
and one way to encourage things being built is to incentivize and make it financially feasible for developers to build, right? But there are going to be consequences, right? If you buy a house in Claremont, and then all of a sudden the next door neighbor sells, and then the developer comes in and builds,
12 units.
12 units. It's you can't stop it. It's hard for you to do anything about that.
Is it hard to stop though? I mean, is it impossible to stop if, let's say, for example, that house, those neighbors in Claremont, right? 12 units. This developer is trying to build, and I mean, from the video that we saw, there was probably 20, 30 residences in that neighborhood. Could they band together and actually stop it, or is that just futile from a?
Well, right now, before those, the CEQA exemption law power, whatever, yeah, potentially, and that's what a lot of people use, was to file a lawsuit saying that you didn't follow CEQA, right, and basically get a temporary or permanent injunction to prohibit that, right? Now it's going to be a lot harder. I mean, typically with these more public developments, there are public hearings that you as a homeowner can attend to voice saying, I oppose this, right? And you can probably through social media get a whole bunch of people in the neighborhood to go to that city council meeting to oppose this project. But ultimately, if the state has already said to the city, hey, you guys have to allow this, then the city is going to be like, look, homeowners, don't blame the state government for enacting these laws, right? Don't blame us. You can vote me in all you want, but again, the cities are stripped of the power to do anything, right?
Yeah.
And some municipalities are pushing back, right? I
They
know
are. Absolutely.
there's like Huntington Beach in Orange County. They're like, I'm not listening. I think Del Mar also has I'm not doing anything, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the laws that is passed, it also streamlines eliminates what the Coastal Commission and their powers in restricting certain
Correct.
property built.
It does.
The coastline, right?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, what bill was that? Bill 30, AB 3057.
Mm-hmm.
This bill exempts environmental reviews under the California Environmental Qualities Act. I mean, literally exempts them from doing it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a law. I understand there are developers that hire a bunch of lobby groups and saying, hey, look, we don't like all these red tape and compliance stuff, so let's lobby our state legislatures to enact laws that eliminates or exempts us from having to do these things, which theoretically then means it makes it economical for developers to develop.
But I mean, I'll play the devil's advocate. I honestly think that these lawmakers could potentially feel they're doing the right thing by building, making building easier, and thus allowing for more properties to be built and having more opportunities to fix the homeless problem.
I guess in theory, yes. I don't know in practice, right? Let's see when this 12-unit property is developed in Claremont and see what happens to that neighborhood, right? I usually associate with, high density housing, cause more trash, more pollution, more congestion, more traffic, more, these are all things that, is going to happen with higher density housing. Yes. Yeah. More people, I guess, theoretically can have housing now because there's more housing, but, again, if I'm moving into an area where I want my privacy and peace and quiet, this law could potentially throw a wrench in all that because I don't know what my next door neighbor may do.
Yeah, I mean, and that's literally the problem that homeowners were facing with the Airbnb, right? I mean, people are literally buying homes, converting them into short-term rental, and then as a result, renting it out to people that throw crazy massive parties and they're loud, and now you're disturbing the peace of your neighbors, right? And the thing is like, there are, for many of you guys who are watching, trash, you guys pay the city or you pay the waste disposal company to come pick up your trash. But in the city of San Diego, that's part of our property taxes. There's no additional fees, right?
That is correct. That is
So
actually,
like,
is very unique.
imagine this 12-unit apartment now that got built, and the homeowners or the trash company comes, and instead of one trash can, there's 12 trash cans. It's just gonna fall apart. And like all of this stuff, I'm like, it just blows me away. Like that when they passed these laws, they didn't think of it.
What incentive does these people have to think of these unintended consequences, right? They're getting pressured that we got to have more housing. We got to get more housing built. Okay. But another interesting issue with this, again, these ADU laws, yes, they streamline the building process, but developers are also wanting to build and sell high-end houses. That's the most profitable, right? Nothing in this says they need to build affordable housing, right? So if I'm a developer, I'm going to come in and build a 12-unit property in Claremont. Am I going to build it for affordable housing, or am I going to build it for, higher end type of living for the, yuppies out there that, that want to live? So,
yeah. I mean, I think that goes to because the land here is just so expensive, right? If land here was cheap, then developers can build more affordable housing, right? But land is so expensive, it doesn't make sense for them to build low income. I mean, the state and the city actually have to offer incentives, right? Tax breaks and all of these other things to even allow or even to convince the developers to build.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So,
I think the word affordable housing is a misnomer.
Yeah, it's so subjective what affordable is. Someone can claim that's going to be very affordable, but for someone that's working at a fast food restaurant, they're going to say that's definitely not affordable, right? So these laws, again, I see where the state legislature is coming from. I really think these laws are geared more to developers. Okay, not necessarily geared towards actually providing affordable housing. Okay, so that's that's my 2 cents on these laws that's being passed into coming to fruition in 2025.
Yeah, JW says depends on how many yuppies are buying. Yep, it's true, right? I mean, it's funny because I honestly, I'll tell you, Eric, I have a mixed feeling about the whole situation. As an agent, I kind of want more properties to be sold and things like that. But as a homeowner, I'm like, I see a lot of potential issues here.
Yeah.
Affordable means government subsidized housing.
This is the whole, like, not in my backyard, the NIMBYs and the yippies, or yes in my backyard. That's the whole thing. Some people are fine with it. Some people are going to be like, heck no, I don't want, some big ginormous housing complex or 12-unit, property being built next door to me, right? That's just not gonna, and it's, the number one calls that I get as a real estate attorneys are oftentimes neighbor disputes. Okay, the amount of time, the unintended consequences you're gonna go with these type of laws coming into place is you're gonna have I'm gonna get a lot more calls from people complaining about their neighbors. Neighbors are partying too much. Neighbors are throwing, not cleaning up for themselves. Just because now you're gonna be in a community with a lot more people, right? And people are gonna have to figure out a way to coexist, right? Because
that's actually a good point that I never thought of, even because I mean, you might not be able to stop the developer from building, right, that plot that they just purchased, but at the end of the day, you got to still live next to these people, right? And so
if it's a developer that's selling, each of the individual units, that's fine. Or a developer that's bought into renting it out, right? So you just gotta, so And that's one of the risks in real estate. You can buy your dream house. That dream house can be a complete nightmare if your neighbor is just the neighbor from hell. All right. And I get these calls all the times. I bought my dream house in Escondido. Then I realized my neighbor is just a complete nightmare, always calling the police on me, doing this, not cutting their branches, trees growing. I get
On and on and
as an
on.
attorney, I get the perspective of these consequences of these laws because I got to deal with it on a daily basis, right? State
I mean,
legislators could care less.
as an agent, like when we look at homes, we actually I always encourage my clients to like go back there during off hours, like rush during like when they get off work, because you want to know how congested that area is, right?
Mhm.
You want to know how noisy it is.
Mhm.
And I even encourage them to introduce themselves to the neighbors if they're thinking about buying in that community,
Yeah.
so that you get to know your neighbors. Now, here's the thing though, is you might have amazing neighbors next door to you when you buy it, but you can't control, and I'm telling you, this has happened to me. You can't control who they sell it to later, because they could literally, you have the best neighbors in the world, and then their neighbors move, and then the person who bought it is like a total nightmare, but you've already owned your home.
Unless you're Mark Zuckerberg and could just basically buy the next door property because they didn't want anyone living next door to them. If you have enough money, you can always buy your neighbor's property. That's fine. But most of us, that is a risk of real estate, right? You buy your dream house. It could be your dream house today. In a few years, where the next door property moves out and someone moves in, you don't know who they are. You don't know how neighbor they are, right? But these ADU laws and these higher density laws that really does increase that kind of risk, right?
Yeah.
It increases the risk that potentially someone next door or living next door is just gonna make it more difficult for you, right? And these are things that, as a home buyer, or if you're wanting to buy a house, is something that you need to consider throughout the home buying process, right?
Yeah.
What is the house next door doing? Knock on their door during the escrow or due diligence period, right? Talk to the neighbor. What are they planning? If they look like they're, more elderly, maybe there's a good chance that they're going to be selling in a few years, right? And that's something that you need to consider, right? Unfortunately, these are things that you can't control, and that's just part of the real estate risks, right?
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes I'm telling people, like, some people have said, I'd rather be a renter at this point because at least I can move when I want to move and not have to deal with this. But as a homeowner, you're locked in for a good 5+ years before you can sell, right? So
I also want to go over this one bill that that I when I was looking at it, and it was AB 2729. Basically, what it provides is an 18-month extension for residential development entitlements, offering developers additional time to commence in the project without risking their entitlement expiration, right? So, I mean, all of these rules that seem to be coming out in 2025 are really, I mean, you're absolutely right when you're saying that it's definitely benefiting the developers. I mean, right here, JW was saying that, it's all of these developers are taking advantage of government subsidies, right? And these bills literally seem like that's the case.
yeah, of course. I mean, that's just how politics are, right? Developers hire lobby groups. These lobbyists then go to the state legislators and say, hey, we have a client here, a developer that, doesn't like these laws. We want you to, promote certain laws that streamlines the development process. State legislatures then, publicize this as if this is something going to help, increase and solve the affordable housing crisis or whatever they things. And so they pass it through, right? Not knowing that a lot of these laws are really actually promoted by developers, right?
So let me ask you, Eric, I know you personally, and I mean, you own a few rental properties, and the thing is you have the benefit of, some of these laws potentially if you wanted to take advantage of it. But the thing is like, if you're just your average gut person, family, bought a home in a nice neighborhood, like, is there any recourse? Is there anything that we as individual homeowners, have rights to, or are we just going to be steamrolled by these developers and the state government?
There were.
I mean, you're a lawyer, right? What lawyer something for us?
I mean, as a lawyer, I have minimal tools in my tool belt to stop a project from going, right? I always tell my clients, look, I can write a letter, right? These letters have really no enforcement power whatsoever. They threaten lawsuits. Or I tell the clients, like, if you really want to stop it, sure, we can file a lawsuit, get a court order to stop this project temporarily, and make them go through the whole court system, and drain whatever legal fees they have, and make it very cumbersome for them to develop, right? That's the normal playbook for a lot of the attorneys.
But your average homeowner isn't going to have the budget to fight these developers.
No, there's a lot of nonprofits out there, like environmental groups, right? Like I said, CEQA was the easiest way for someone to stop a project, claiming that, hey, this development didn't, fulfill their obligations under CEQA, right? We didn't get this report. They didn't do their environmental analysis, right? That's the easiest way. And there's a lot of nonprofits out there that will fund these type of lawsuits, right?
Eric, you're going to laugh at this. You're going to laugh at this. This is what JW said.
Yeah, I know.
It's literally shining in your eyes.
I need to position myself where the sun doesn't start shining in my face.
I know. We'll fix it for the next front. I promise, JW. Because the thing is this is literally our second live ever. Like for us, it's still kind of we're still working out the bugs, and we're gonna get better. I promise, we're gonna get better. So yeah. I mean, the thing is if you guys that are watching, and if you guys, we're going to post this, if you have any questions, reach out to me. We're going to share the link, and you can schedule a 15-minute chat with me if you want. And if you have questions about this, any of these topics for ADUs, or if you're thinking about building one and you're not sure. And then the thing is, you and I can have a conversation, and if I'm not able to help you, I will make sure I put somebody in touch that understands, let's say, the laws, like somebody like Eric, who can then help potentially guide you. I think this is going to be a topic that is going to be a lot more, in front of our faces going forward. It's just, I don't think this is going to go away. These new developments of ADUs, because I think it seems like it's the shortcut to building multifamily without having to get rezoned, without having to do any of these other, city ordinances and compliances. And the thing is, but it's allowing developers to be able to build multifamily.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But without having to go through all of the regulations that existed previously. They can just literally buy a single family home with a decent sized lot and then stick 12 units in the backyard and then turn it into a complex.
Correct. It's just, this is my prediction, as we move forward 2025 into 2026, you're going to have a lot more of these laws that's going to, again, strip away from the city's abilities to control what they want to do with the people living in the cities, right? And ultimately, a lot of these cities are going to have to cater to the developers that come in and say, hey, we got state laws that are passed that protects us and we can do this, right? Yeah. And people that's living in the city are going to start thinking, okay, well, we really don't have too much ability to stop these, even though this is something we don't want, right? Yeah. And that's just the tension that we have right now between the state government and the city governments.
Yeah. And I think this is going to be a problem that more and more people are going to have to deal with, unfortunately.
Right. I'm just an attorney. I follow the laws.
Yeah. So no, this was a good topic. I mean, we couldn't go through all of it. It's just because there was just so many. And this is only these 12 laws are only dealing with ADUs, right? They're not even I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a ton of other new laws that are going to come out with regards to real estate. You know, the thing is yeah, I'm really curious to see what's going to happen going forward into 2025 and 2026.
Yeah. Hopefully at least some positive movement towards solving the housing crisis, you know, will be achieved through these laws. I'm skeptical, but that's because I'm coming from a lawyer's perspective.
Well, you're always skeptical because you're an attorney.
So
yeah. Thank you very much, Eric, for this time. And I think our audience, you know, at least it gave them something to think about, you know, something to consider. Because when you're buying your home now in a residential neighborhood, there's a possibility, a legitimate possibility that your neighbor could potentially put, you know, 3 or 4 units in their backyard.
Yeah. And, you know, these laws are just put in place because, you know, politicians, you know, think that, you know, these laws should be put in place. We elect our state legislature. People don't realize that real estate laws is controlled mainly by the state and municipalities. The federal government has very limited say in terms of what a state and what cities can do with the land and real estate, right? So if people are concerned with real estate laws and what laws are being passed in the state government or in the state, the cities, it really comes down to homeowners to be active participants in our, you know, local government, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's volunteering to be on the HOA board, whether it's also figuring out which candidates are going to be sitting on the city council that is not going to be promoting high density housing, or vice versa, if that's what you're promoting, right? So it's really up to a lot of this people in the municipalities to really pay attention to what exactly the government is doing. Otherwise, you're going to get these type of laws in place that ultimately, you know, that people may not necessarily want.
Yeah. And then for those of you, if you have any questions, like I mentioned previously, you can go to this website, findyourhomesandiego.com/contact. And that will give you an opportunity to schedule some time with me on my calendar. And then we can jump on a call and I can answer specific questions that may be affecting you from a real estate broker's perspective. And then if you need additional help, then, you know, I can put you in touch with an attorney like Eric. Also, just to bring it up, I also have contractors and handymen. So if you guys are just looking to potentially have somebody who can help you with, you know, home repairs and stuff like that, you can also reach out to me anytime. Thanks, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Tune in. We're not going to go live next week, but we're going to go live the week after. And then we're going to have another topic, hopefully not as controversial as this one, you know, to share. And then what we'll do is we appreciate your support. We appreciate you staying with us. And thank you again, everybody. And I know that we were originally scheduled for to 1, but I think we talked this beast to death. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, unless there's questions from the viewers about anything, but
yeah.
And yeah.
Yep. So thanks again. And we're going to sign off real quick and I'll talk to you guys all later.